everybody. It is Tuesday, October 13th, if you weren't aware. And here we are again on a Tuesday night. A big welcome to our guests and, of course, Marie-Claire. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're really, really excited. You're our first guest composer of probably 3 this season. I hope you all enjoy the talk that Jenna's going to lead. Jenna is not only our esteemed accompanist, but she's also a fantastic host, and she and Marie-Claire will just go right into it. So over to you, Jenna.
Thanks, Marg. Hi, everyone. Welcome, of course, to all of our choir members and to those of you who are joining us from the public, as we've been calling you. Very nice to have all of you with us, and of course to have Marie-Claire. I'm going to get to an introduction of Marie-Claire in a minute, but I first wanted to just give you a little sense of how this session will run. Marie-Claire and I had a pre-conversation earlier this week. I know that you're going to really enjoy everything that she has to say. We're going to have some musical examples interspersed with her speaking and questions. And then at the end of that, which would be probably about 45 minutes, don't hold us to that. It might be a little bit longer, you never know. Then we'll have a Q&A with you. So if you'd like to leave questions in the chat, you can do so throughout the whole talk, and I will collect them. Or at the end, if you prefer to ask the question yourself, please either put your name and say question for the end, or put the raise hand function if you know how to do that, and I will call on you at the end of the session. And if you're having any difficulty with either of those 2 things, please ask Hattie how to use them, the chat function or the raise hand function. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our fantastic guest for today. She's a Franco-Ontarian composer who started creating nearly 20 years ago, despite her young age. And she expanded from her classical violin student horizons through many different collaborations, including accompanying dancers, to fiddling in a team of folk musicians on a historical steam train, which I can't even imagine what that must have been like. She holds bachelor and master's degrees in composition from the Schulich School of Music at McGill and Université de Montréal, and she's won countless prizes for her work. You can find her pieces published in very familiar names like Cypress Choral Music or Hal Leonard, and she also writes film scores. She's now the composer in residence for Chœur Adlesia, an upper voice choir, and she's sung in award-winning female ensembles such as Concerto della Donna, which was led by the acclaimed choral director Yvonne Edwards. So composer, fiddler, creative spirit Marie-Claire Saindon is speaking to us from her home in Montreal. Welcome, Marie-Claire. I'll ask you to unmute yourself and just say a quick hello to the choir.
Hello, everyone.
Perfect. So Marie-Claire, first I would love to hear a little bit about your early life, your childhood, and how music related to you as a child.
Right, so that's an easy one for me. My mother was a singer-songwriter, and Acadian singer-songwriter. So both my brother and I had a musical education, he in piano, myself in violin. But having a singer-songwriter mother means that she was having workshops and she was having shows, and pretty much at a very early age I was definitely following her on the stage, doing anything that I could do with her. So either it was singing with her or it was just doing accompaniments on like very simple things that I would do on my violin as best as I could. I think the earliest I did stuff like that was 7 years old. So I did do the classical violin training, but I also did the folk training. Not very hardcore at first. It was just my parents making me listen to folk music, since both of them are Acadian, giving me some big fake books that are full of fiddle tunes. But that was it. And I went to De La Salle High School in Ottawa. So it was a phenomenal education. And the last couple of years I was there, I ended up getting some sort of tendonitis in my shoulder I'm still dealing with to this day. And I kind of wanted to find another way to do music, and writing music was kind of the interesting next step that I hadn't really considered until I was forced to stop playing for a few months. And what was a great crazy happenstance was that our choral master that I'm sure many of you know, Robert Filion, he kind of set this composition competition on all the theory students of grade 12 and grade 13. And we didn't have a choice. We had to write it. I was not in that group of classmates anymore, but I just decided I would do it anyway for fun. They had Stephen Hatfield come in for workshops, and so my Robert Fillon decided to have Stephen Hatfield come in and be the jury for this little competition we did at school. And I ended up winning this competition, and that was my piece Le Train d'Hiver, actually. So Stephen Hatfield really liked it, and he said, look, if you want to, I could put in a good word at Boozy and Hawks, and we could send it in and see if we can't get it published, which after 3 years it did. So that was pretty exciting at first. I think we must have a link for that we can share, right?
We do. So the first piece that we're going to hear is Train d'Hiver, exactly as Marie-Claire said. And I'm not sure which link Bill has, if he has the new one or the old one, but this is Marie-Claire's piece. I like all the clapping hands. That's fantastic. So that was Train d'Hiver with Concerto della Donna, I think, who we will speak about soon. But speaking of trains, you told me on Sunday that you had a bit of tunnel vision going into university. You really wanted to be a film composer. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's pretty funny because trains have a lot to do in my life, which I have no idea how that happened, but they do. So I was part of the cohort of music students that saw Lord of the Rings and then said, oh, that's so much fun, I want to write film music, and just there are too many of us out there. But it doesn't matter, I definitely have that in mind. So when I wrote Le Train d'Hiver, it was just kind of a challenge for me. I was never part of the choral community, I was not part of a choir. So like just listening to Train d'Hiver now, I hear all the things that are not idiomatic for the voice, that are like, it really is a mood piece, that the words are being spat out as fast as possible because it's not an ideal text setting, but it's a great mood piece for sure. So I wasn't really invested in choral music, though I had a lot of fun with this piece. So I was just, focused, film, so I went to McGill for composition there, and after that I went straight to Université de Montréal to do a master's in film music, because one of the teachers that was at McGill during my last year did a course there on film music and was opening up a new program at Université de Montréal after that, so it was a great kind of entry point for me. During all those years, here's my comment about trains, I used to like work on a steam train as an entertainer, so I would play folk music with a bunch of other folk musicians, and that's really where I learned a lot of traditional music for a good 6-7 years, very intensively, and it was so much fun to get to know more about French Canadian music in that manner, just playing 5 hours of it every day for 5 months a year. It was fantastic. So that was what was happening, but it was still kind of split up. There was my folk music, and then there was my kind of career, maybe classical, maybe contemporary music, not sure what it was doing with. So when I started my master's, I wasn't going to be working on the train anymore, and I needed another musical outlet. And that's when I had a friend in Concerto della Donna saying, we're losing a lot of members. You're a good enough musician. Doesn't matter, you haven't really sung professionally. Don't worry about it. Like, come audition. And I did. I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't know who Ewan Edwards was. And it was a lot of fun because after my first year singing with them, as I was doing all my film music studies, I was learning all about choir music by memorizing about 60 pieces in 1 year, which is what Ewan would make us do. 3 big full concerts, and it kind of got into my ear what upper voice choir music sounds like and what was more idiomatic. So I had my first commission after the Train d'Hiver was published about a couple of years before that, and I remember writing that piece and really being dissatisfied not on how the commissioning choir sang it, but how I really hadn't understood how choir worked and how, like, if it's a more of a choir with a more amateur level, how I should be able to understand voice well enough to know what to write so that everyone can be comfortable singing and happy and proud of whatever they've sung, and not writing something ridiculously hard because I don't understand the voice. So when I entered Della Donna, that really helped me have a better idea of how it works. And the next year, that's when Ewan said, hey, I was going through the list of new pieces published by Booze and Hawks. I see this Train d'Hiver thing. That's you, right? Oh, right. Yes, that's me. I write music. Yes. And he just basically said, all right, write us something for Christmas. And the level of the difference between all the pieces I wrote before for choir and then this one is just completely different. So this goes for everybody who writes music for any kind of medium. Just perform in that medium so you understand it better, either conduct or sing or whatever. I'm speaking to mostly choristers, but that was a fantastic education right there. So
we have a piece from that piece exactly that you were just speaking about, which is meditation. It's a multi-movement piece though, correct? Can you set up, we're going to listen to just the first movement. Can you set that up for us? Oh, you're muted. Marie-Claire, could you set up what l'annonce, the first movement of meditation, sounds like?
Set that up. Thank you. I thought you meant put the link up. Set that up. So basically, it is it's 3 movements. It's a triptych, and I had really in my head to have current either Acadian or Franco-Ontarian poets. Without knowing the whole rule of copyrights. So I ended up chasing copyrights and permissions after the fact that I wrote it. Thankfully, everybody was very keen on having this happening, so that was great. Lesson number 2. But it's, so it's all about the Virgin Mary. It's kind of a Magnificat, but a very more, it's French-Canadian poets. And it's only the first piece that the poem really was about kind of Mary's first reaction of hearing that she would be giving birth to God's son, which was just completely different, obviously. But the 2 other poems are also very neat because they're not necessarily talking about God or Mary, but if you read those poems after, you can kind of see how it could have been something she would tell herself. So the second poem is kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to keep the secret to myself, and then questioning herself and going, wait, no, if I know the secret to all of this and to the love of God, actually I'm going to share it with everybody. And then the the last one is basically just a thank you for all the wonderful, beautiful things, Lord. And I just found all the poems beautiful and was very happy to set them for Christmas with a string quintet, I think, in this case.
Perfect. So now we're going to hear the first movement of this 3-movement meditation with Concerto della Donna again, I think.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm sure our choir has many fond memories of playing with strings as well. Hopefully we'll get to do that again soon. So following your education at McGill and then at University of Montreal, and then joining this choir, that wasn't the only thing that you ended up doing in terms of your education, right? What else did you add to your portfolio?
So just to kind of reiterate what was happening, I was doing film music. I was just in choir and writing choir music for fun. And what was happening is I found one fairly prolific film media company as a client, and I was writing for them every month, which was almost enough to pay the bills, but not quite. And when I finished my master's, there was kind of this feeling of this is right, but it's not right. Something's not working, and I don't quite understand what it is. In the end, it was networking and community. I wasn't part of the film industry community. I was part of the choir community as it was happening. I was kind of really focusing on all the activities with choirs and really finding that I could find my artistic voice in that. in that domain instead of film. So I really didn't put all of my efforts into getting to know people and getting to go to going to screenings or things like that for film. So at one point I really was kind of confused as to what I really should be doing. Meanwhile, writing more and more choral music with you and just giving me tons of opportunities to write other projects. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go to the HEC Haute Études Commerciales in Montreal and do an arts management graduate program. So I went through that. And halfway through, then I got all the whole networking and all the marketing terms and how to understand all these things, and went, oh, look at how I could apply this to my choral music. And every time I would try to be like, okay, no, I'm focusing on like being a manager or like working with, I don't know, l'Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal. They have a lot of great posts for young managers and anybody who's in arts organizations, really. But I kept coming back to, oh, I could do this in the choir world. Oh, I could do it that way. And like, it was clear to me after my first year of graduate studies in management that I wanted to be a composer, and I was understanding way more how to do it professionally after taking that class, that program. So
yes, and actually it led to something else developing as Yvonne was retiring, right? What happened with the changeover with your choir?
So Ewan was approaching his 80th birthday, not quite yet at that moment in 2014, but it was time for him to retire to do all kinds of other things he's been wanting to do. So he retired from Concerto della Donna, and the group of singers did not want to stop singing together, but we all respected that Concerto della Donna really was Ewan's project. So we kind of dissolved the ensemble and then renamed under a different name, and then two of Ewan's conducting students took the helm and co-directed what is now Chœur Ecclesia, which is the ensemble for which I am composing residence at the moment. So that was a new kind of opportunity that I sang a little bit with them, and then after a while when I realized I wanted to be a choral composer for real, that's when I said, okay, how about I write at least one piece for you a year just to help beef up my portfolio. And that's how they turned around and said, cool, can you write us a mouth reel? And I went, what? So that's where my classical and my folk music all kind of merged together, and I had to write an Acadian mouth reel. But it's not an arrangement. It really is an original melody that I wrote from scratch, but knowing the style fairly well, I was able to pull off both something that is good for choir and something that sounds like so folk and traditional that people keep attributing, crediting it as a traditional melody arranged by Marie-Claire. Like, nope, I wrote this.
That's a pretty good claim to fame, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to hear now Turlotte, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Turlotte, yeah.
Perfect.
Hey dum di da di dum dum di dum, hey da da di dum di da lay di da lum, hey dum di da, hey dum di da di dum di da lum, hey sta di da lay dum stum da di la, hey dum di da di dum, hey da di dum lay di da lum, hey dum di da, hey dum di da di lum, hey sta di da.
Very fun. I can imagine singing that in a kitchen party even. Back home, that's what we would do. We would sing exactly with the dee-da-dum. So I can see why they wanted to credit that as a traditional folk song. That's fantastic.
That's that's a lot of fun, and yeah, again, I wouldn't have been so comfortable with the style had I not spent all those years on the steam train belting out those songs that are pretty much kitchen party music. Loved doing that. Yeah.
So now we're at 2017, 2018, and you've started throwing yourself into another means of getting your music out there, which was competitions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So that same year that I was writing Tullit, that was also the year where I just told myself, okay, I'm going to just find as many competitions around Canada and just try to win maybe one, but that would force me to write a bunch of music. And I ended up winning quite a few, which was really surprising. It hasn't happened since, so I think it was just a streak of really good luck or something. But the first piece that I wrote for those strings of competition was Light. And this was a piece, originally I was going to write it for SATB, a cappella, and then kind of dropped it because of everything that was happening at home. My mother passed away. I got married all in the same 2 weeks. It was a little intense. So the opportunity for the SATB version of Light kind of dropped. And then when this competition for the Choirs Ontario with the Ruth Watson, oh no, I'm going to say her name wrong. Ruth Watson Henderson. I'm saying it wrong. I hate this. Sorry. Performance anxiety.
I think that was right.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I met her too and she's wonderful. There was a competition under her name, and I sent in Light, but it was for an SSA for children's choir. It was going to be the Toronto Children's Chorus that was going to sing it. So I added some piano, I made it for treble, and I just hoped for the best. And that's what Light is. It ended up being something really fun to write and really full of energy. So this is just kind of a different facet and a different color of the music that I write now. So I think we have a video clip. I think with the links that we sent, it was not the right one. So I'm going to drop it in the comments right now for our host. Here it is.
Can you make that work, Bill?
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Great. So this is going to be a video clip of Light. We'll give Bill a second to get that all teed up.
Yeah. Thank you. So that, yeah. So that was, it's a piece with the text of Rabindranath Tagore. So it is somebody living in India, but his text was written in English as he mastered the two languages as a poet. And it was full of energy and really fun, just kind of praising light. And that's basically it. And yeah.
Perfect. And this is again Chor Edlesia, which is your composer in residence choir.
Yeah.
Yes. great. That is so much character, and it's so warm and beautiful. I really liked that piece a lot.
Thank you. Fun fact, it's my husband on the piano.
Well, props to him too.
He really helped me see what was doable and not doable in piano accompaniment too. So that was very kind of him to point some things out and help with a few like idiomatic things there. So I have a live-in piano editor for anything I do with a pianist now.
Very key for choral music.
Yes.
Oh, and I see in our comments, Bob wrote, "I loved that."
Thank you, Bob.
I think that's great. So, as you were continuing with this choir, a kind of partnership opportunity came up that led to a piece that actually I don't think we're going to have time to listen to, but it led to a number of other things, including you working with the National Youth Orchestra. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I had that same year, so during the light year, during the competitions, and during Turlut year, Cœur et Lésia and I had a little, we kind of got really ambitious, and we said, hey, why don't you write us a second piece very quickly? And I just went, okay, what for? And they said, well, we're having a partnership with Oriana Women's Choir in Toronto. Could you write us a piece that's kind of like a double choir kind of formation where it's two SSA choirs singing kind of independently but together. So I found a text by Sarah Teasdale and that I really, really, really love. And if you can, please go listen to this one. If anything, just for the text. I love the poem. The poem itself is called Leaves. There are too many pieces called Leaves, and for me it didn't encapsulate the message of the poem, which is the central line of the poem, which is blinded by a leafy crown. That is the title, and anyway, I won't talk about that one too much. It's basically, it was the fact that the conductor of Oriana Women's Choir is Mitchell Patey in Toronto, and he was going to be the chorus master for the National Youth Orchestra of Canada, not National Choir, but Orchestra of Canada. So what this orchestra does, they train youth from 16 to 26 or something like that. I might have my ages wrong, but around that group age. And they usually do a tour around Canada and then somewhere else in the world every summer. And part of their training before they go and do their concerts is to sing. So often they would sing, most of the time they would sing madrigals as a part of their training. And the year that Mitchell came in, which was 2018, he suggested, well, wouldn't it be fun if we sang as an encore to show that our instrumentalist students can actually sing, and so that also that their singing is not just kind of a blah thing we do in the morning, but really, oh, the goal is to sing a piece by the end of our concerts as an encore. And then his second suggestion was, well, why don't we commission Canadian composers that are around that age group, so that it has even more meaning. So that first summer, Mitchell Patey, so the National Youth Orchestra, asked myself and Matthew Emery to write something for the orchestra to sing at the end of their concert. And so they would stand up and just kind of burst into song by heart. And that's how Terre-Neuve happened. This piece was written for the National Youth Orchestra, so I couldn't have a very wide range as far as vocal range, because most of them weren't trained singers, so they didn't have a very wide range. But they were very musical, they were very rhythmically strong, so it had to be a 2-minute thing, blast, and had to do with Canada. So when I found Annick Bishop-Perrault's poem, she's from Newfoundland. She now lives in BC, but she had just this beautiful poem just describing the geology of Newfoundland and how awesome it is, and I just fell in love with it and had to do something with that. So that's where it came from.
So I think what we'll do, first I'd like to say that I loved this connection because Ottawa Chamberfest, who I also work with, presents the National Youth Orchestra. We're usually one of their main stops, and we discovered in this conversation that I would have heard this piece sung by them, and I just think that's fantastic. They have such a presence, even though they aren't trained singers, because of their training as musicians, and they're quite a large group. It's usually about 100 people, so it was very it really meant something when they sang, and they always ended their concerts with "O Canada," if I remember correctly, so it was very interesting. Terre-Neuve and then "O Canada." But what I think we're going to do is we're going to listen to Terre-Neuve once, and then Marie-Claire is going to talk a little bit about the composition itself and her composition process. And then if we have time, we'll listen to it again so that you kind of get the sense of everything that she's illustrated for you after having heard the piece and her speaking. So I see Bill is multitasking now, but hopefully he can also set up Terre-Neuve for us in a minute here. And Marie-Claire, who's singing? Is this the recording of the National Youth Orchestra?
I think that's the link I sent you. So it's not their concert version, but it's their official album version. So it's the recording they would have done in 2018, right
Okay.
before doing the concerts, actually. So it's kind of like a. Anyway, they performed it really well because by the end of their tour, they were really starting to get into it. Whereas this was like, oh my gosh, we're about to go and starting to go on tour. So anyway, they have a great energy, and it's very useful to have a large group when you make them stomp on a big wooden stage, as you will hear. It's very satisfying.
Perfect.
And John Darlington is on the podium again, and I think we're going to get an encore.
That's just fantastic. I have to read this description that I found of this piece. I don't know if you wrote this or who wrote this, but it says shrieks of sun, colors of the ocean, rock, crackling ice, shivering snow and wind. Terre-Neuve is a love letter to the powerful geology and ancient mysteries found on the east coast of Canada. Did you write that, or was that written about the piece?
That was me taking words from the poem and turning that into a description. So I kind of wrote it, but really it's words from the.
So your composition style is so evocative. There's so many vivid images, and we can hear the percussive sounds. Can you talk a little bit about the imagery and about how you create these soundscapes while still kind of holding true to the words and the choral style?
That's a hard balance. It's really easy to do what I did with Train d'Hiver, for example, and just go with the image itself and then just go full blast into it and then forget that, right, we won't be able to hear the words if I do that. So this one was a little easier because I didn't do full-on percussion all the time. Of course, I just used it sparingly as to where it was the right time to do it. So first off, there are three kind of sections in this piece. where the first one is talking about the sunlight, there's a fantastic, actually, her husband is also a poet, and he did a wonderful translation, English translation of the poem. So I'm going to retrieve this immediately as I bumble around. Maybe I won't. Give me 2 seconds. But basically, I should have taken this out before we started. The first section is about shrieking sunlight on gouffre.
Bob says it might be at the end of the score.
Yes, which is
Maybe one of our choir members could read it.
I'm almost there. My apologies.
That's okay.
If someone has it,
Marg, do you want to read it? Marg's going to read it.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Land splattered with shrieks of sun, with colors of ocean and rock. Rust red, the cliff splits. Crackling ice, a fresh taste of shivering snow stirs a shrouded memory, mingles with the wind, spirals vibrant with the salt of a joy new found.
Thank you, Marg. So first section, lots of sunlight, shrieking sunlight. So it's not a gentle sunlight. It's just kind of like there in your face. And it's, I mean, everybody who's been to Newfoundland knows how everything is just raw over there. The wind is raw, the waves are raw, the rock is raw, the salt in the air that's slapping your face is raw. And so that nothing could be really quiet in this piece. So I'm kind of going in there with just full force. What's really fun about this is the word éclaboussé, so splattered in French is éclaboussé, and the cla and the bousse are something you could just take and just kind of make that the waves splattering and splashing everywhere, especially if you did it in a canon. So it goes terre éclaboussé, terre éclaboussé, terre éclaboussé, kind of slapping at you. So that's a way that I use the imagery, but also use the words as they are. Something that's a little less obvious is that some people might know that one of the nicknames of Newfoundland is the Rock. So in the middle, she uses the word rock. And what I did, I should back up. The poem itself, it never says Newfoundland in it, but what happens is that she uses, in French, she uses terre as the first word of the poem and neuve as the last word of the poem. So you have Newfoundland, basically, or land and then newfound, sandwiching the whole poem. So every time you have the name Newfoundland or parts of the name or the nickname, then I have the same musical element, which is the series of just 4 very strong chords. So that's something else that I did in there. The big obvious part is when the glaciers are splitting and cracking. So that's the stomping and clapping you hear in the middle. I got my order wrong. Apparently you hear the snapping first and then you hear a thud. I did it the opposite in the piece, not having had been to Newfoundland yet, but so I do a big stomp and then a slap after to imitate the cracking ice over there. And at that point...
I know that was actually one of the questions from our choir, was have you been to Newfoundland and what was that experience like? So had you been before you wrote the piece, and obviously you have been since?
I finished the piece 2 weeks before I went to Newfoundland. So that was the timing was a little weird. It would have been nice to have gone and then write it as a reaction, but I guess there was more the excitement of getting to go that fed it into it. I really just based myself on what the text was saying, and then truly that it's a testament to how the poem reflects the land so well and Newfoundland so well, because I, as someone who'd never gone before, got most of the imagery right in my head just from her evoking it through her poem.
I know also for our altos, when I was looking at this score, there's that undulating figure that they're going to have to trade back and forth between, I think, alto 1s and alto 2s. So I imagine that's a little bit of kind of the ripple effect.
Yeah. So there is when she says gouffre de neige qui fait trembler, so it's this fresh taste of snow that makes you shiver. That's a literal translation. It's not the poem English translation here. But after having such a strong snapping and clapping from the glaciers breaking, I felt that was probably a good time to just take a mini pause and really kind of linger in the nice, cool, fresh, cold air a little bit. And so it's kind of a slow shiver. And then we go into the joy of the Newfoundland, of the old ancient memory that is freed from the iceberg, is what I am understanding. And then it comes out and mingles with the salty air. It creates a new joy, which is what the last bit is, basically just a build up to the word joy, the new joy, basically.
So I think we should listen to it one more time, and then we'll take questions. And I will say that at the very end, following questions, we do have one more piece that we'll leave you with. But first, let's listen to Town Live again, now that we have some of these word music interplay in top of our mind.
And John Darlington is on the podium again, and I think we're going to get an encore.
I love that the explosion at the end correlates right away with the audience uproariously clapping.
This is obviously not their album recording. I clearly sent the other link. That was their live performance in Edinburgh, and so that was the excitement of being on stage. And I'm glad you heard that one instead.
I think that's fantastic. So I think now we'll move to our Q&A. Please, if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, or if you'd like to drop a question into the chat, feel free. I do have a couple to start us off. One came in from Tony that I thought was a great question. Tony, do you want to ask it yourself, or would you like me to? I can unmute you. There we go.
Okay. First of all, it was a wonderful pieces. I really enjoyed them. As I was listening to them, I couldn't help but notice that the ones we heard are scored for women. So I'm wondering what leads you to write pieces for women? Is it the voices, or is the practical realities of the singers that you have available? Or what, if you can just elaborate a little bit on your choice of women's voices.
Sure. I think you have answered it already there. What happened is I started writing for choir, especially when I was in Donna. So a lot of the things that I experimented with was in the women's women's voice range. And it's only recently that I've started working with ACTB. Actually, one of the competitions I did was with Corleone men's choir in BC, and that was such a brain twist for myself because I've never really worked enough with men's voices, I find. And there are so many different, it's not just taking SSAA and then putting it an octave lower, obviously. So there was a very fast learning curve over there, and I still don't feel like I master men's voices. I understand them much better than I did 2 years ago, thankfully. And I am still trying to get as much experience as I can doing at least SATB. But yeah, very often I'll be asked to do women's voices because that's where I started off, and that's where I started writing stronger pieces, and those are the pieces that are a little more known. And so women's choirs or upper voice choirs or children's choirs will be the ones coming in and commissioning me.
Speaking of commissions and of writing new works, I heard rumor that your newest work that you're currently on has something to do with NASA. Is that true?
Yeah. So that one is for a 9-voice ensemble in Chicago. They're called La Cacina, and they are doing, hopefully, a concert in June, hopefully, called The Matriarchy. So they said, we just want songs about all kinds of women we haven't sung about ever, or ones that we do know about. And they said, look, we'd really like, we find it's really hard to find pieces about women in the STEM fields. So, okay, I'll try to find a poem about a woman in a STEM field. And they said, well, here's a list of women we are very interested in the States. And of course, it'd be great if we could be a household name. And one of the names that jumped out at me was Katherine Johnson, which is one of the first, she was the first woman, an African-American woman, to work on the space. I got all my terms wrong, but she was on the flight research, space flight team for the first manned flight and for the first moon flights, and she got to calculate the trajectory, which is actually doable and interesting when you read her autobiography, and she explains everything as to how she did these really interesting things. What I really liked about her, though, is that when I read her autobiography, at first she says, I always loved numbers. Numbers followed me everywhere I went, and I counted everything I could, no matter what. And that just kind of told me, oh, that'd be fun. I could have just numbers bouncing around and dancing around. And so I had this kind of textures of people singing, instead of singing the names of notes when they're doing a fun texture, they'd be singing the degrees of the notes they're singing. So it's a good theory exercise at the same time for those who want to sing this piece. And then I got into this contract before the protests happened in June. But I kind of I was reading this book and thinking, okay, but half of this book is not about math. Half of this book is about her experience as an African-American woman. And then the protests happened, and I thought, okay, I'm not equipped to write this text myself. So I went around and asked quite a few other artists, professors, anybody who is people of color in the choral world, just tell them, look, I'm working on this piece. This is my reaction to her book. I'm the one writing the lyrics. Is there anything in there that jumps out at you that really just feels wrong or off? So I had a lot of help. I had a lot of support, and that score was sent off about 3 weeks ago now. So that was my latest. It was the first time I wrote lyrics too. So that was quite the challenge. And there's some interesting comments if you want to read in the chat right now. So they were called computers. So one of the nicknames they had was computers with skirts, because women weren't research mathematician, they were just computing things. So computers with skirts. Back in the day, computers were not what we have, a physical computer, but a person doing that job. All kinds of things that were really interesting from her book. It's for young adults, but I don't care. I love it. It's called Reaching for the Moon, and give it a read. It's very not entertaining. It's well, she is funny too, but it's just really eye-opening, I found.
That's great. I really wanted to hear more about that project as soon as I got wind of it. So can you tell us a little bit about your compositional style? Like, how do you start writing a piece? How does that process work for you?
So usually I start with the text. So as soon as I know what is the theme I'm going for, may that theme be very specific or just very general, I read as many poetry books as I can. I find something that I like, and then I go and ask for permission to use that text. Half the time now, I'm actually commissioning poems myself with people that they're all from De La Salle. Most of them are poets from De La Salle. And we talk about the topic, they write the text, they send it back to me. And then I just look at the images, I look at the structure of the text itself, I'll look then at where is the climax of the poem. And from there, then I can kind of decide what section I want to highlight, and then within the paragraph that is the climactic paragraph, what is this line that I want to be the climactic line, and then after I do that, what is the word that I want to be the climactic word, so that I know where I'm going. I try to see if there are little mini climaxes as we're going along that route, and once I've figured out those goalposts can change as I go, but at least I now have a route to go to. Most of the time I write chronologically, so I'll start from the beginning. Very often I'll leave some gaps and be like, okay, I don't quite know how to bridge these two sections together, but I know what I'm doing in the next one, so I'll do that and then come back and merge them after. If it's a piece that needs to be more melodic, I will start by writing the melody and then figure out the harmonies after and work on the texture after. If it's a piece that screams texture and mood, kind of like Terre-Neuve, I immediately start working out the texture and I figure out that the melody is going to come out of that texture eventually. So those are two different ways of working at it.
That's fantastic. It's very interesting to hear. Does anyone from the choir have a question? You can also raise your hand. I can take a quick look through here. If anybody has their hand raised. No? Well, then I would like to thank you for spending this evening with us. Our choir is very excited to be working on your piece. I'm very excited to be working on your piece. Marg is very excited to be working on your piece. And I know that having heard from you now, people will take inspiration and go home and practice it, right, choir? Practice it a lot, every day, especially the craquement part. Marg, would you like to say anything as well?
I just love that we're all sitting here listening to choral music. It's been so refreshing, not only to be talking to you, Marie-Claire, but just listening to music. It's a soothing thing. I loved it all. I also want to thank Jenna for being a fantastic host and getting so much out of Marie-Claire, who already has so much information in her. So Marie-Claire, you're invited to join us for some social breakout rooms. I understand that you are probably able to hop from one to the other, so you can meet a number of people. So I believe that she will do the visiting. And just a little reminder for choir members next week. We're doing sectionals, so we will divide into two groups and we'll be working on Terre-Neuve, Hymn to Freedom, and Grace Before Sleep. And so you have the rehearsal tracks available, and as Jenna said, work every day, especially Terre-Neuve. Work on your be stars.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jackie. Really good to see you, Jackie. Absolutely. So any other questions now that you've had a minute to think? Any more questions for Marie-Claire?
And if there aren't questions before we go to social time, we will listen to one more piece. And I strongly encourage you to go to Marie-Claire's website. She has lots of great videos and links there. I had a blast looking through it and listening to choral music as well. I know all of you would enjoy it because I know you. So please feel free to go do that. We can drop her website in the chat. I'll find that while Bill sets up the last piece. Marie-Claire, do you want to just introduce this last piece for us? It's Garde ton rêve.
So it was, again, for the National Youth Orchestra. They asked me again the next year to write something, as they wanted something that was more general and more focused on them kind of wishing well the audience after their piece, like it could have some sort of hymn-like quality to it. So I found, again, but this is an older poem by Albert Loiseau, who wrote this early 20th century, and I modified some of it. So it's partly his poem, partly my words, partly my father's words. We kind of worked on it together, which was a lot of fun. And this is Garde ton rêve, wishing you to keep everything you've heard today close to your heart and keep all of your dreams and your hopes alive in that way.
Mm-hmm.
What a beautiful way to end the evening. It's so great to listen to this music with all of you, and we look forward to making music together again next week. And with that, I think Bill will break out into our social groups, and I'll see all of you next week. Thank you so much, Marie-Claire, for being with us, and we look forward to working on your piece.
Thank you. I think I'm going to need help figuring out how to jump from one room to another, which I've never done before.
We'll figure out how to help
Okay.
you.
Thank you. got invited to her room. I guess I'm gonna go there.
Yeah,